Hi, I'm Kevin. Welcome to my channel. It's a cool, wet, rainy day today, so I thought I'd come out here and talk to you about how to be comfortable when camping in the rain. So a little while ago I uploaded a video and got a nice little comment. Someone said, hey, I like your video. But they had a question. They said, hey, do you have any advice for camping in the rain? I'm going to be camping soon and the rainy season is coming where I live. So I thought about that and thought, hey, that makes a great video. And then this afternoon, the conditions were just right to make this video. So I'm out here talking to you in the rain, and I hope you get something out of this. All right, number one, when you're camping in the rain is your rain gear. That's the first line of defense. If I'm in camp and just hanging out, I'll have my rain gear on, my rain pants, my rain jacket. I'll be nice and toasty. The problem is, and this is a big problem on most trips, is what do you do when you're hiking or you're paddling and you're exerting yourself, you're sweating inside your rain jacket and you're starting to get wet on the inside. That's a huge dilemma. And it happens. This is a high-end Gore-Tex rain jacket, apparently breathable, but the amount of breathability is outmatched by your perspiration, and you will get wet on the inside. So what do? Well, I open up my ventilation as much as I can. I've got some big pit zips here, and I try and consider the conditions I'm in. If it's going to be reasonably warm that day, I will probably take all my rain gear off and just get wet. That way later on when I get to camp and it might cool down, I can be rewarded because I can take off my wet gear, I can put on my warm long johns, I can put my dry rain pants, both dry on the inside and the out, I can put those on and I'll be toasty warm. Same thing with my jacket. I'll put on a nice fleece top or something and put my jacket over it, and if it's wet and cold, I'll be warm in camp. There's lots of times when it's unclear what you should do, and it's an enormous dilemma. Do I get wet? Or do I hike with rain gear on and get wet on the inside? So it depends on the wind, it depends on your altitude, it depends on the season. I can't give you perfect advice. I often opt to take my rain gear off, but what I'll often do if I'm not sure is I'll wear my rain top, my rain jacket, with all this ventilation going for me, and I'll just wear shorts and get my quick dry shorts wet. Again, that way when I get to camp I can be rewarded with warm, dry clothes. And I got this hat. This is you don't have to wear a hat like this, but this is my Tilly hat. It's a cotton hat, but it's like a thick, heavy canvas cotton, and it soaks, but water runs off. And I really like that because it keeps water away from my collar and whatnot. You don't have to wear a hat like this, but it works for me. So, another little tip I have for you. Everyone likes to wear camp shoes in camp because your hiking boots, even if they're not wet from rain, could be wet from perspiration. People like to let their boots dry out. So what I like to do, of course, is put on camp shoes, but if it's raining, I'll put on a good warm pair of socks with a pair of Gore-Tex socks over top of those. Gore-Tex socks are a little expensive, but they make a very nice rain boot when you're in camp. Keeps your feet dry. Really good tip. And something I've started doing recently is going back to wearing gaiters. I used to wear those. I went through a period where I didn't. But when I hike without my rain pants on, in the rain, I find that water runs down my leg, into my socks, and into the inside of my boot. Even though I'm wearing waterproof boots, my boots get soaked that way. So I've started wearing ankle gaiters just to keep the water out of the top of my boot. So let's talk about tents, because one of the biggest problems I hear about people getting wet when they're camping is they crawled in bed at night in a nice warm sleeping bag, it rained overnight, and they woke up in a puddle of water inside their tent. Probably one of the most common mishaps that can happen in the rain while camping. So number one is to pitch your tent in the correct place. Location, location, location. You want to put your tent up high, on high ground where water is running off. That's number one. Because I've seen old rickety tents that do leak stay fairly dry if they're placed in the right position. And I've seen very high-end tents full of water because they were placed in the wrong spot. So it's not the quality of tent so much as it is where you put it. But if you are out buying a new tent, there's a couple things you should look for. You want to make sure your tent has a nice, what they call a bathtub bottom. So the material of the floor doesn't just go on the ground, it goes up on the sides, and creates a bit of a barrier for water running in. You want a nice good 3, 4, 5, even 6 inches of bathtub floor all around your tent. That fabric is usually a thicker fabric than the rest of the tent, and that's recommended. The thicker it is, the more waterproof it will be. But I'm getting away with a very thin floor. I have a light tent. I have a Big Agnes copper spur, and I have a UL1 and a UL2, and it has a very thin floor. And I get away with that because I pitch it in the right location. So here's a little thing that bugs me about tents. I've seen some high-end tents with a very poor design. That is where the roof of the tent, when the door is open, the roof overhangs the floor. So the drip line runs right into the floor of the tent. That drives me bonkers. So what I look for when I buy a tent is I'm always looking for that roof line to be above the floor, so the drip line is outside of your tent. So here's a controversial topic for you. A lot of folks, if they bring a ground sheet for their tent, they bring a ground sheet and they put it inside their tent. And I see how this works. The folks that do this, many of them are very, very experienced, bring a type of plastic ground sheet, and they'll put it inside their tent, and what they're doing is recreating that bathtub bottom on the inside, so that if their tent gets wet, they've got a plastic barrier between the water and their sleeping gear, and that works for them. That's a great idea. Makes a lot of sense. If you put your tent in the right place, you don't have to do that. What I bring is a lighter than plastic, a Tyvek ground sheet. This material is what they wrap houses in for construction. It's a vapor barrier. And I'll put it down, even if it's not going to rain, I'll put it down on the ground. The ground is usually moist, and that keeps the bottom of my tent from picking up moisture. And if nothing else, it keeps it from being heavier the next day when I'm carrying it. But the problem with ground sheets outside your tent is simple. You don't want the ground sheet extending beyond your tent, because if water lands on this, it will run into your tent. So for sure, you want this shorter than the drip edge of your rainfly, and I actually like to have it right under the tent, like about an inch under the tent. I've cut this to the exact size so that it's about an inch shy all around if it's under my tent, and that'll protect my tent from a bit of moisture, but it will also protect my tent from a bit of punctures, and it's a very cheap alternative to a lot of the commercial aftermarket tent bottoms that you can buy. So there's certainly some controversy there. This method works for me. Like I said, I have a very thin floor to my tent. I'm very careful where I pitch it, and I stay dry. I have not been wet in a long, long time, since I was a kid in a tent. So another thing, if you're going to be camping in the rain, you want to make sure that you do is that you pack all your important gear inside a waterproof container. Perfect example, very important piece of gear, toilet paper, you hear me, inside a Ziploc bag, and I'm good to go. This is perfect. And a few years ago, it was really hard to find good quality waterproof bags for your gear that weren't super heavy and expensive. This is a little Sil nylon, a 13-liter bag from Sea to Summit. This is what I put my clothes in often. It's waterproof, it's held up, it is super light, and yeah, it costs a few bucks, but it's nice to stay nice and dry. So I'll put my clothes in one of those, I'll put my sleeping bag in one of those, I'll make sure everything is in its nice little compartment and nothing's going to get wet. I know a lot of folks in the States use trash compactor bags. They line their backpack with a trash compactor bag, and that makes a lot of sense. I live in Canada, we don't have trash compactors, and so I'd probably have to order them, special order or whatever, so I just pack everything separately. If you are putting everything in one bag, you need to think about what you do with wet stuff. So you're going to have a wet rain gear, you're going to have a wet tent fly. Where do you pack your wet stuff if you only have one container to put your dry stuff in? So just think that through. Bring some more garbage bags or something. Always bring a few extra garbage bags. You never know when you want to put something wet in a garbage bag to keep it from contaminating everything else, or maybe you found something you want to keep dry.
And even though all my gear is packed in waterproof bags, I'll still put a pack cover over my pack to keep my pack dry and give me some added protection.
Okay, probably the biggest tip I can give you, whether you're canoe tripping or backpacking, is to bring a tarp. If it's going to be wet, this can really be a game changer in terms of the mood of the group. When I'm canoe tripping, I bring a much bigger tarp 10 by 12, I think it is, something like that, and basically create an outdoor living room. A bunch of people can hang out underneath it, stay dry. They can take off their rain gear, air out a little bit, and we can have a fire right underneath the edge of the tarp, and we can hang out underneath there and dry off from the heat of the fire. Just a great way to live if you're on a canoe trip on a rainy day. But even on a backpacking trip where you're trying to conserve weight, I bring this small tarp. I think this is an 8 by 10 tarp. It's sil nylon. It crunches down to about that big. It's about a pound, and yeah, that's a lot of weight. People like to get rid of weight in their pack, but if it's going to be raining, I will bring one of these, and it's a game changer. Again, it's an outdoor living room. It's a place that you and others can gather. It's not big enough for 5 or 6 people, but 1, 2, maybe 3 people can hang out underneath this, stay dry. Again, take off your rain gear, let yourself air out, and just feel more normal. And it really changes the mood of a trip. Before I go, there's one more little conversation I want to have with you guys, and that is the great debate, the historic camping debate about down or synthetic bags. And for years, ever since I was a kid in Scouts, I heard that synthetic bags are better because they'll keep you warm when they're wet, and down doesn't keep you warm. Well, there's been some changes to technology, and there's some treatments for down fibers, and maybe that's not true. Maybe they do keep you a little bit warmer. But let's think about this for just a sec. A wet synthetic bag. A wet synthetic bag. You're not going to crawl in that to warm up. So a buddy of mine, we're camping a few years ago. We were doing some backpacking. We just got to our campsite and set up and finished supper, I think. And in walks this guy off the trail into our campsite, and he is soaked from the chest down. He had fallen into a creek. He had stepped on a log that he thought was stable. It wasn't. He went into the creek, got completely soaked. All his clothing was soaked. All the gear in his backpack were soaked because he didn't have any protection for it. And he was wet. He was probably going to be hypothermic soon because it was an early spring day. And he didn't say, "Oh, good, here's my wet synthetic bag. I'm glad I brought a synthetic bag. I'm going to crawl in it and warm up." No, he didn't say that. What we did was we made a big roaring fire, dried out all his gear, including his synthetic bag, and then he went to bed in his dry synthetic bag. So if you want to bring a down bag, don't worry about the wet. If your down bag gets wet, you're not going to be happy either. Regardless of what sleeping bag you have, you're not going to be happy if it gets wet. So you're still going to have to dry it out, probably near a fire. So I bring a down bag because it's light, and I protect my bag when I'm traveling. I keep it in a nice dry sack. When I pitch my tent and crawl into it at night, I make sure my tent is in a good location, and my tent isn't going to leak in any way, shape, or form. That's how you stay warm and comfortable on a camping trip. And I guess my last piece of advice when you're camping is you know, if it's dreary and overcast like it is today, people are going to have a dreary and overcast disposition. So you should probably adopt a sunnier disposition and offer to make a hot drink for people, make a hot meal. Those little things will really boost morale, and you can still have a fun time on a wet camping trip. Good. All right. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you guys got something out of this. I hope you have a great day, and stay dry.